You were never meant to arrive early. That is the first truth most people cannot endure. You watched others move faster, speak louder, take space with ease, while something in you hesitated, withdrew, observed, and quietly, without your consent, a question formed in the body long before it formed in words. What is wrong with me? Nothing was wrong, but something was unfinished. The rarest personality does not begin life equipped for speed. It begins life burdened with depth. And depth, when forced to live in a shallow world, feels like inadequacy. From early childhood, such a mind senses more than it can explain. It feels tensions beneath conversations, meanings beneath gestures, dangers beneath smiles. The nervous system is alert, not because it is weak, but because it is perceptive. And perception, when unsupported, becomes anxiety. This is the first wound. The body learns vigilance before it learns safety. Muscles tighten around the chest, the breath shortens, the jaw locks subtly as if holding back words that would not land. The unconscious registers a rule: do not reveal too much, do not move too fast, do not expose what others cannot hold. So, the persona. Lydia adapts, it becomes quiet. It becomes thoughtful. It becomes invisible. But invisibility is not absence. It is compression. Everything that cannot be expressed is stored, and the body becomes the archive of unlived instincts. Here is what most people misunderstand. This personality is not slow because it lacks ambition. It is slow because it is metabolizing experience at a deeper level. The UN. Conscious is constantly working, assembling patterns, reconciling contradictions, trying to form a coherent inner map before taking an outer step. While others act and correct later, this mind hesitates until meaning is secured, and in a world that rewards immediacy, such hesitation is punished. The child internalizes shame without knowing its name. Shame is not the belief that one is bad, it is belief that one is out of rhythm with life itself. And shame settles into posture, into gait, into the way one occupies a room. The rarest personality grows up carrying this tension. A sense of destiny paired with a sense of delay. A feeling of something important waiting inside, coupled with the terror of releasing it too soon or too late. This tension becomes an inner split. One part wants expression. Another part demands protection. This is where the shadow begins its work. The shadow is not evil, it is rejected vitality. Every time the child sensed truth and swallowed it, strength descended into shadow. Every time anger was felt but suppressed to preserve belonging, power went underground. Over years, the unconscious fills with unlived responses. They do not disappear. They wait. The rarest personality often grows compliant on the surface and turbulent beneath. The body remembers every unspoken refusal. The shoulders carry it. The stomach holds it. The nervous system becomes skilled at containment. This creates a peculiar paradox, outward gentleness masking inward intensity. Such individuals are often mistaken for passive. They are not passive, they are restrained. And restraint requires enormous energy. But energy stored without release becomes pressure. The psyche begins to compensate through imagination, through inner dialogue, through private worlds where expression is safe. While others build external identities early, this personality builds an inner cosmos. Ideas, symbols, intuitions accumulate. Meaning becomes richer, but action remains delayed. This is not dysfunction. It is incubation. The unconscious is preparing something that cannot emerge prematurely. Like bone forming beneath cartilage, strength is assembling invisibly. But the cost is loneliness, because few can see what has not yet taken shape, and fewer still have patience for what cannot explain itself. Trauma often enters here, not necessarily through violence, but through chronic misunderstanding. Being unseen over time is a wound. It teaches the body to brace against disappointment. Hope becomes cautious, desire becomes muted. The individual tells themselves they are content with little, but beneath that narrative lives grief for a self not yet allowed to exist. The shadow grows heavier, and with it, fear. Fear of visibility, fear of failure, fear of success even more than failure. Because success would demand exposure. So life progresses slowly. Careers start late. Relationships feel delayed. There is a sense of watching life happen from a slight distance. And yet, beneath the stillness, something is ripening. The rarest personality does not mature linearly. It matures subterraneously. At some point, often in the second half of life, the unconscious can no longer tolerate. Containment. The body begins to speak more loudly. Fatigue appears without clear cause. Anxiety surfaces when old defenses no longer function. Depression emerges, not as emptiness, but as heaviness. These are not signs of collapse. They are signals of readiness. The psyche is demanding integration. What was once suppressed must now be met consciously. The shadow presses upward. Old anger surface. Unexpectedly. Boundaries once avoided now insist on expression. The individual feels disoriented, as if becoming someone else. But in truth, they are becoming whole. This is why success comes later, because success for this personality is not acquisition. It is alignment, and alignment requires the reconciliation of opposites, strength with sensitivity, solitude with contribution, depth with visibility. The body plays a crucial role here. Trauma stored in muscle and fascia begins to release as awareness grows. Breathing deepens, posture shifts. The individual starts occupying space without apology, not aggressively but truthfully. This changes everything. Fear responses recalibrate. The nervous system learns that expression no longer equals danger. The unconscious, once defensive, become generative. Creativity intensifies. Decisions become clearer. There is less urgency, but more precision. Others may see this as a sudden awakening. It is not sudden, it is delayed emergence. The rarest personality does not chase goals blindly. When it finally moves, it moves with inevitability, because every step is informed by decades of internal observation. Patterns others missed are now obvious. Ours, meanings, others ignored, now guide action. This is when leadership appears, not as dominance but as gravity. People feel understood in the presence of such an individual, not because of charisma but because of depth. Depth recognizes depth. And yet, even here, there is grief. Grief for time lost, grief for versions of the self that remain dormant. This grief must be honored. Without it, success feels hollow. Identity for this personality is not chosen early. It is discovered slowly, and discovery requires descent. The descent into the unconscious is not dramatic. It is quiet. It happens in solitude, in long walks, in sleepless nights where old memories resurface with new meaning. Here, self-deception must die. The comforting narratives of victimhood dissolve. Responsibility emerges, not as blame, but as authorship. The individual realizes that avoidance, once protective, has become limiting, and this realization is painful because it demands courage long postponed. But courage is not loud. It is persistent. It is the willingness to remain present with discomfort rather than fleeing into distraction or fantasy. The rarest personality learns to stay. As awareness deepens, meaning reorganizes. Success is no longer defined by comparison. It becomes expression of inner coherence. Work aligns with values. Relationships become fewer but truer. Life simplifies and intensifies simultaneously. This is why such individuals often peak later. They do not burn quickly, they smolder. And when they finally ignite, the fire is controlled, enduring, and difficult to extinguish. Success does not announce itself. It stabilizes environments. It brings clarity where there was confusion. It integrates rather than conquers. And most importantly, it feels earned. In the end, the rarest personality understands something others never confront. Life is not a race toward visibility, but a negotiation with the unconscious. Those who rush outward too quickly often spend their later years unraveling what they built without self-knowledge. But those who are forced inward early, by sensitivity, by fear, by misunderstanding, carry a different fate. Their suffering was formative. Their delay was structural. Their solitude was instructional. They arrive later not because they were lost, but because they were listening. And when they finally step forward, it is not to prove any. It is to embody something that could only be formed through time, tension, and silence. This is not triumph. It is completion. And yet, even within this early terrain, there is a deeper layer that must be spoken aloud, because silence is where this personality learned to survive. From the beginning, the rarest personality senses contradiction in the world. Adults speak words that do no match their bodies. Rules are enforced without meaning. Affection is offered conditionally. The child notices these fractures instinctively, and because the child cannot challenge them without risking abandonment, the psyche does something ingenious and tragic at once. It turns inward. The unconscious becomes a refuge, but a refuge is also a hiding place. Physiologically, this turning inward shapes the nervous system. The parasympathetic response dominates. The body learns to conserve, to wait, to hold. Heart rate slows in moments when others would surge forward. The adrenal system fires not toward action, but toward anticipation. The child becomes skilled at reading rooms, predicting emotional weather, avoiding threat before it arrives. This is not fearfulness. It is attunement, penned by necessity. But attunement without agency becomes burden, because when you feel everything and act on little, tension accumulates. The muscles learn restraint as a default posture. The diaphragm tightens. Breathing becomes shallow not from panic, but from vigilance. Even joy is held carefully, as if it might cost something later. This is how emotional suppression begins, not as denial, as postponement. Feelings are not rejected, they are delayed. Anger waits, desire waits, ambition waits. The unconscious takes note of everything and promises silently, later. But later is an abstraction to a child. What the child feels is absence, absence of resonance, absence of mirroring, absence of permission, and absence, repeated over time, shapes identity more than presence ever could. So the child adapts again. They become agreeable, or invisible, or intellectual, or imaginative. Whatever keeps the internal world protected, this adaptation is praised by the world. Mature for your age, so thoughtful, so well-behaved. These are not compliments, they are confirmations that the child has successfully disappeared, and disappearing feels safer than being misunderstood. What forms here is not weakness, but a split. The outer self becomes manageable, acceptable, predictable. The inner self grows dense, complex, alive with questions that have no outlet. This density is often mistaken for introversion alone, but it is not merely a preference for solitude. It is the consequence of being forced to metabolize life internally. This is why such individuals often feel older than their years and younger than their age at the same time. Older in perception, younger in expression. The psyche develops unevenly because it was required to specialize early, in observation rather than action. The unconscious, however, does not forget its original impulses. It records them somatically. Every impulse denied is stored not as memory but as tension. The body becomes the ledger of unfinished gestures, hands that wanted to reach, voices that wanted to rise, feet that wanted to move forward. And because the mind is intelligent, it constructs narratives to justify this restraint. I am not ready. I am not like them. I do not need what others need. These narratives are not lies. They are partial truths used as armor, but armor, worn too long, becomes weight. As adolescence arrives, the world demands identity. Choose a direction, assert yourself, compete, define who you are. For the rarest personality, this demand feels violent, because identity to them is not a declaration, it is a discovery, and discovery cannot be rushed without distortion. So they delay again. They explore quietly. They test possibilities internally rather than externally. Others mistake this for indecision, but it is discernment operating in private. Still, the cost intensifies. Comparison enters. The rarest personality watches peers gain momentum, socially, professionally, romantically, while they remain in a state of preparation. This breeds a specific kind of pain, not envy, but self-doubt layered with guilt. Guilt for not moving faster, guilt for needing more time, guilt for being difficult to understand. This guilt tightens the body further. Shoulders hunch, the chest caves slightly, the gaze lowers unconsciously. The body communicates apology before words ever do. And yet, beneath this posture, something resilient persists. The unconscious continues its work. It studies failure from afar. It observes consequences without participating. It learns through watching rather than doing. This creates an internal wisdom that cannot be taught. Here lies the paradox. While outward development appears delayed, inward development accelerates. The psyche is building a comprehensive map of human behavior, motivation, fear, and contradiction. It is learning what power does to people, what belonging costs, what happens when desire is pursued without reflection. This is why later in life, such individuals often display a startling clarity about human nature. They have seen the patterns before stepping into them. They have already suffered their consequences internally. But at this stage, the suffering feels meaningless. Without context, pain feels like punishment. The child, the adolescent, the young adult wonders if their hesitation is a flaw rather than a function. And because the world reinforces speed, the conclusion seems obvious. I am behind. What they do not yet see is that they are not behind. They are deepening. Depth is not rewarded early. It is tolerated at best. Often it is pathologized. Sensitivity is labeled fragility. Reflection is labeled overthinking. Withdrawal is labeled laziness or fear. These labels seep into the unconscious and shape self-concept. And so the rarest personality begins life carrying a secret conviction. If I were truly myself, I would not survive. This conviction is rarely conscious. It lives in reflexes, in hesitation, in the way the body braces before speaking. This is the seed of later success, but it is also the root of early suffering, because success for this personality will not be about becoming more. It will be about allowing what has always been there to finally emerge. But emergence requires timing, and timing is not chosen by the ego. It is determined by readiness of the whole organism, mind, body, and unconscious, to tolerate truth without fragmentation. That readiness does not come early. It comes only after the psyche has gathered enough evidence that survival does not require self-erasure. And, until then, the waiting continues. What follows after this long internal waiting is not relief, but tension of a different order. Because the second chapter of this personality's life is not about hiding anymore. It is about living with what has been hidden. By the time adulthood begins, the rarest personality has already accumulated an inner weight that others will not carry until much later, if ever. Experiences have not simply passed through, they have settled. The unconscious is crowded. Images, emotions, instincts, and half-formed truths press against the threshold of awareness. And yet, the outer life still demands functionality, adaptation, performance. This creates a chronic inner conflict. On the surface, life may appear stable, education completed, work begun, relationships entered cautiously. But beneath this surface, the psyche is under strain. Because the individual is now old enough to act, but not yet integrated enough to act truthfully. So action feels wrong, forced, or hollow. The body knows this before the mind admits it. This is where many experience a vague but persistent dissatisfaction, not dramatic despair, but a dull ache, a sense that life is being led slightly to the side of its true center. Mornings feel heavy without clear reason. Decisions feel draining. Even successes feel strangely disconnected, as if achieved by someone else. This is not laziness, it is misalignment. Physiologically, the nervous system remains caught between states. The sympathetic system activates when demands arise, deadlines, expectations, social obligations. But the parasympathetic response pulls back just as quickly. The body wants to retreat. The result is exhaustion without obvious exertion. Burnout without visible overwork. This is often misunderstood by both the individual and those around them. They are told to push harder, to commit, to stop thinking so much. But thinking is not the problem. Suppression is, because by now, the shadow has grown substantial. All the traits that were once unsafe, assertiveness, anger, ambition, sexuality, authority, exist, but they exist unconsciously. And what is unconscious does not obey the ego. It expresses itself indirectly. This is why the rarest personality may experience sudden outbursts that feel alien, or deep resentment that seems disproportionate, or self-sabotage at critical moments. These are not flaws. They are the shadow demanding recognition. The psyche cannot remain divided indefinitely. Energy split between suppression and functioning will eventually seek resolution. If the individual does not consciously engage the shadow, it will intrude through symptoms. Anxiety is one such symptom. Anxiety is not merely fear of the future. It is the body's protest against living in contradiction. It arises when instinct knows one thing and behavior enacts another. The heart races not because danger is present, but because truth is being avoided. Depression is another. Depression in this context is not emptiness. It is pressure turned inward, aggression without direction, life force that has nowhere to go. The body slows because it is tired of carrying potential without expression. At this stage, many try to resolve the tension externally. They change jobs, they move cities, they seek relationships that promise completion, they adopt identities that look decisive. Sometimes these attempts work temporarily. Often they deepen the split, because the problem is not circumstance, it is fragmentation. The rarest personality begins to sense this, even if vaguely. They realize that external structure can substitute for inner coherence, and this realization is terrifying. Because coherence requires confrontation, with fear, with grief, with anger long denied. This is where avoidance becomes subtle. Instead of hiding completely, the individual hides behind productivity, intellect, or spirituality. They analyze themselves endlessly without acting, or they act compulsively without reflecting. Both are defenses against the same thing, feeling the full weight of what has been carried. Trauma stored in the body now becomes more apparent. Old memories surface, somatically rather than narratively. A tightening in the throat when speaking honestly, a collapse in energy after asserting a boundary, a surge of fear when success approaches. These are not random reactions, they are the body remembering earlier consequences of visibility. The unconscious does not understand time the way the ego does. To it, past danger feels present, so when the individual approaches authenticity, the nervous system reacts as if survival is at stake. This creates a profound dilemma. Growth feels dangerous, but stagnation feels suffocating. Many remain stuck here for years, outwardly functional, inwardly restless, a sense of life passing without being inhabited. This is often the loneliest phase because the individual can no longer fully disappear, but cannot yet fully emerge. They are too aware to remain unconscious, but too fragmented to feel whole. And yet, this tension is necessary, because it is precisely this prolonged friction that begins to forge something rare, self-knowledge earned through endurance rather than collapse. The psyche is slowly learning where its true limits lie, what can no longer be avoided, what must eventually be faced. The shadow once feared begins to appear less monstrous, not because it has softened, but because awareness has strengthened. The individual starts to notice patterns rather than react blindly. They see how anger points to violated values, how envy reveals unlived potential, how fear marks thresholds rather than dangers. This is the beginning of integration, though it does not feel like progress. It feels like disillusionment. Old fantasies of who one should be dissolve. External validation loses its power. What remains is unsettling, a quieter, sterner question arising from within. If I stopped performing, who would I be? This question does not demand an immediate answer. It demands honesty, and honesty at this depth requires patience. The rarest personality has already learned patience the hard way. Now that same patience becomes an asset rather than a burden. Because while others chase resolution, this individual is learning to stay with uncertainty without fleeing, and that capacity to remain conscious in ambiguity is what will later allow them to act with unusual precision and depth. But that comes later. For now, this chapter is about tension without release, awareness without resolution, and the slow dismantling of illusions that once made survival possible. It is not yet transformation. It is preparation under pressure.